I'm hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians. The Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians. The USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. We're going to do things to Nigeria that Nigeria is not going to be happy about, and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible, horrible atrocities. These are cherished people. These are great people. Leave them alone. Warning, the Nigerian government better move fast before it's too late. If they don't, there's going to be hell to pay.
Donald Trump just told the world he's ready to send U.S. troops into Nigeria. The reason? To stop what he's calling a mass slaughter of Christians. The media is running with it, some calling it a new religious crusade. But is that what's really going on? We looked past the headlines, and the story Washington is selling doesn't quite add up. Over the next few minutes, we're going to break down the facts on the ground and uncover the real geopolitical chess game at play. This is the story you won't see on the evening news. So what's all this about? In late October and early November 2025, Donald Trump unleashed a series of bombshells on social media. He accused Nigeria's government of failing to protect its Christian population, threatened to cut off all U.S. aid, and then said he'd told the Department of War to get ready for action, promising the U.S. might go in guns a-blazing. Just for the record, the U.S. hasn't had a Department of War since 1947. It's the Department of Defense. But Trump's pick for Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, doubled down, confirming the Department of War is preparing for action. The whole thing was built on a simple, powerful, and terrifying story: a Christian genocide. Politicians and advocacy groups have been pushing staggering numbers, with some claiming over 50,000 Christians have been murdered for their faith since 2009. Senator Ted Cruz has been a major voice for this narrative, accusing Nigerian officials of enabling the mass murder of Christians by Islamist jihadists. It all paints a very clear picture of a religious war with a distinct aggressor and a clear victim. But that's the first clue that the official story is flawed. Once you get past the outrage and look at independent data, the picture gets a lot blurrier. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, or ACLED, is one of the world's most trusted conflict trackers. Their data confirms that while Christians are tragically targeted, they aren't the only victims, and in some cases, not even the main ones. According to data provided to news agencies covering the period between January 2020 and September 2025, there were 385 attacks targeting Christians that led to 317 deaths. But in that same time frame, there were 196 attacks that specifically targeted Muslims, which resulted in 417 deaths. Let that sink in. In attacks where religion was the clear motive, more Muslims were terminated than Christians. ACLED analysts have even called claims of 100,000 dead Christians a massive overestimation that isn't supported by their data. In fact, a 2022 ACLED report found that while Nigeria's population is about half Christian, violence specifically targeting Christians for their faith made up only 5% of all attacks on civilians. The vast majority of the violence just isn't that black and white. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, has repeatedly called for Nigeria to be named a country of particular concern, not just for attacks on Christians, but because the violence impacts both Christians and Muslims in huge numbers. So if the idea of a one-sided Christian genocide falls apart under scrutiny, what is actually happening in Nigeria. That brings us to our next exhibit. The truth is, Nigeria is caught in a perfect storm of overlapping crises, and religion is just one piece of the puzzle. Blaming everything on a holy war ignores the brutal reality that millions of Nigerians, Christian and Muslim, are living through. The violence really boils down to three main drivers that have almost nothing to do with faith. First, and maybe most important, is the conflict between nomadic herders and settled farmers. For centuries, herders, who are mostly ethnically Fulani and Muslim, lived alongside farmers, who are often Christian. But climate change has wrecked that balance. Desertification in the north is forcing herders to move south into the fertile Middle Belt, searching for land for their cattle to graze. This migration sparks conflict. Herders' cattle destroy crops, and farmers fight back by blocking old grazing routes. A fight over land and water quickly turns violent. And because the two groups often have different religions and ethnicities, it's easy to slap the religious conflict label on it. But at its heart, this is a desperate battle for survival over resources that a changing planet is making scarce. The second major driver of violence is massive, organized crime. In northwestern Nigeria, tens of thousands of armed bandits are running wild. These are jihadists with a religious agenda. Their only ideology is money. They carry out mass kidnappings for ransom, raid villages for whatever they can find, and force terrified locals to pay illegal taxes. And they are equal opportunity criminals. They attack Christians and Muslims without distinction, preying on anyone who is vulnerable. The Nigerian government has failed to provide basic security, creating a vacuum that these criminal gangs have been more than happy to fill. And third, of course, you have the Islamist insurgencies of Boko Haram and its offshoot ISWAP. These groups are undeniably vicious, and they absolutely do target Christians, bombing churches and persecuting believers. But their main victims, by a huge margin, have been other Muslims. These jihadists reserve their deepest hatred for Muslims who don't follow their extremist brand of Islam. They see them as traitors and terminate them without a second thought. To say their violence is only anti-Christian ignores the thousands of Muslims they have slaughtered, kidnapped, and forced from their homes. Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has pushed back hard against the Christian genocide narrative, pointing out that the country's constitution guarantees freedom for all faiths.
We assure all of you that we will, defeat terrorism.
Earlier, Tinubu rejected Trump's accusations of Christians being targeted in Nigeria, saying the Nigerian constitution guarantees religious freedom. However, the country seems to be treading with much caution.
One of his ministers, Nyesom Wike, who is a Christian, called the claims politics taken too far, and noted that some of Nigeria's top security officials, including the Chief of Defense Staff, are Christians. So, if we have a complex mess of climate change, organized crime, and indiscriminate terrorism hitting people of all faiths, why is it being sold to the world as a simple holy war? That leads us to the motive. If the reality in Nigeria is so much more complicated, why the sudden, aggressive talk from Trump about sending in the military? As is so often the case in geopolitics, the answer is a mix of domestic politics and strategic self-interest. First, there's the political angle here at home. Trump's tough talk is music to the ears of his evangelical Christian base. The Christian genocide narrative is a powerful emotional trigger that mobilizes a key voting bloc by positioning him as the world's defender of Christians. Reports suggest his focus on the issue sharpened after seeing a segment on Fox News, and he's been heavily lobbied by conservative groups and politicians like Ted Cruz to take a hard line. It's a simple story that presents a clear hero and villain, cutting through the noise of complicated foreign policy. But this goes way beyond domestic politics. There are huge geopolitical and economic factors at play. Nigeria isn't just any country. It's Africa's biggest population, its largest economy, and a critical anchor of stability for the entire region. It also happens to be sitting on a treasure chest of what are called critical minerals. As the world shifts to green energy, demand for minerals like lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements is exploding. These are what you need to make electric car batteries, wind turbines, and all our advanced gadgets. Nigeria has massive, largely untapped reserves of these exact minerals, with some reports valuing them at over 700 billion. This puts Nigeria in a key position for the future of the global energy supply. For decades, the country has relied on oil, but the government now wants to develop its mining sector and process these minerals at home, not just ship raw ore overseas. A destabilized Nigeria, or one that relies on the US military for its security, would be much more likely to fall in line with American economic interests. It could open the door for US companies to get first dibs on these resources, cutting out competitors like China, which has been gaining influence across Africa. The threat of intervention, even if it's just talk, is a power move. It sends a message: play ball with us, or risk being labeled a failed state that needs saving. It's a ruthless game where a humanitarian crisis can be used as a pawn for much bigger prizes. So what's the bottom line? We have a US president threatening to invade Nigeria, citing a Christian genocide. But the evidence shows that narrative is a dangerous oversimplification. While Nigerian Christians face real and horrific persecution, the violence on the ground is not a one-sided religious war. It's a complex crisis driven by climate change, organized crime, and terrorism that terminates both Muslims and Christians. The Christian genocide story is a politically useful tool. For Donald Trump, it fires up his base and makes him look like a global defender of the faith. On a bigger stage, it creates a potential excuse for intervening in a country that is becoming strategically vital for its reserves of minerals like lithium, the building blocks of the future economy. The threat to send in troops guns a-blazing isn't about a well-thought-out plan to save lives. It's political signaling. It's a move to pressure Nigeria's government, score points with a domestic audience, and position the US for future influence in a resource-rich corner of the world. The story they're selling is about humanitarianism, but the evidence points to a much colder game of power, politics, and profit. Now that you've seen the evidence, what do you think is the real reason for Trump's threat? Is it a genuine humanitarian concern, a domestic political play, or a move in a larger geopolitical game for resources? Let me know in the comments below.